In this presentation, we'll go through some key points to consider when building out your design best practice for RPA processes using UiPath. This is not an extensive list, but hopefully will serve as a good summary of points to consider. So let's dive in. Our first item will be around workflow design. So in UiPath Studio, when you're starting out a new project, you'll have the option to either choose a blank from a blank template, or you can use some of the templates that UiPath provides out of the box. There's quite a lot more templates as well when you go to the more templates folder. But one of the most useful templates that I've found, especially for repetitive processes, using either queues or feeding from an Excel file that runs through a lot of transactions. The robotics enterprise framework is really a good starting point for those type of processes, and is a consistent way of designing those. So finding some templates that you and your team can use for certain type of processes is really key, so that there's consistency between your workflows, and that everybody is more familiar with the design. So we'll be using, or this example that I'll go through will be based on the enterprise framework. So the next thing to consider is breaking your workflow up into smaller, reusable components and bits that you can build out. So when breaking it up, when you go through your design, you'll find that there's activities or steps that can easily be broken up and be unit tested as a single unit. For example, logging into an application, logging out of an application, or doing navigating to a specific screen and doing an activity there, and then going back to the main screen. So those things can be broken up and then put in their own workflow files. So that's really key, is breaking those things into smaller bits that you can build out and unit test on their own. Later on, you'll see that these things can then be reused as library components in all your other projects as well. Project organization is then key, especially if you've got a lot of workflow files, is to maintain a nice folder structure with naming for your different systems, and having the workflows associated with the systems, and also the naming convention of your workflow files, having it quite descriptive of what it does, and then also adding the system it's associated with. So that organization will really be key to keep your design clean and be easy to go through it and troubleshoot it later on. Then the other really key thing is to have some sort of configuration file or configuration for your project. So this template comes with a configuration file by default. So if we jump over to the configuration file, I'll show you some key information bits for your project that can be changed at any point in time, and not needing you to update your process, like URLs, credential names, and things that you can keep separate from your process. And this you can then just reference inside your process, and this can then be easily be updated at later point in time. For example, in the constants tab, there's a location where your screenshots get saved. So you can put in the folder path where your exception screenshots get saved, and then you can refer to those when troubleshooting as well. So that's the config file. Really key to consider when building out your projects. Then the workflow layout. So this template is based on the state machine layout. So you'll have a start, and you have different states of your state machine, and then you have your paths in terms of what your different conditions is to route back to the different stages in your state machine. And this will keep repeating till it goes to the final end process. So this is one type of layout. Then the other layout will be either a sequence. So for this example, this is a sequence, but it's probably better to build this out as a workflow. So if we zoom out a little bit, you'll see that there's a lot of nested if statements in this sequence, so it's really difficult to follow. So breaking this up as a flowchart is much more readable and much more easily to follow and maintain as well. And you can easily reroute to certain pieces of steps that can be redone in your flow as well. So yeah, if you've got a simple steps that just follow after each other, a sequence is fine, but the flowchart will become more relevant when you need to have a lot of decision points and you've got maybe a lot of nested if statements, then it's good to consider maybe breaking that up into a flowchart. So our next point will be around readability and naming convention. So like I already mentioned, naming your workflow file is really important. So having it organized within specific folders, then having a very descriptive name for your workflow file that contains what it does and also the system name it associates with. And then when you're inside your workflow file, you will have so if we go to the variables, so when you assign your variables, having a descriptive name, you can also, in some cases, if you feel that's useful, add in the abbreviation for the variable type as well, so you can easily know if this is a boolean or a string or an integer or what it is that you're working with. So that's around variables. And then arguments. So here we've got two input arguments. It's adding the direction of the argument in the argument name. It's really important. So if we go to this example, you'll see that we've got an output example as well, and then an input output example as well. So having the direction of your argument name in the front before you have the descriptive name is really useful when working with your argument. You know that that is an argument and you know the direction of the argument. Then the next item to consider in terms of naming is your activities. So when you drag and drop an activity and you select maybe something to click on, you will notice that there will be a default or a random generated name of your activity at the top here, and then renaming that with more appropriate name is really important. So it will help with error handling and finding specific things in your workflow. And you can also sort of more easily read your design. What's happening? What are you clicking on? What is this activity doing exactly? Because you leaving it as the default name is not always useful, because it's a random system generated name, and it's really good to rename your activities and make them more descriptive of what's actually happening there. So our next item is around log messages. So log messages, it's mainly, or a lot of cases, it's used in for troubleshooting and for sort of following through your design and your process. Where did you get at? What was the last log message, or to log specific information in terms of what decision points was followed or triggered in your workflow. So having at least your first log message when you open up for each of your components, so you sort of have a reference point on which component you're in, and then as many log messages as you need in your decision points. Maybe in each of the different decision points you have a log message that sort of guides you and tells you what path was followed in your decision points. It's really useful for troubleshooting. But yeah, don't use too much, but use as many log messages as needed for you to be able to really troubleshoot and to know what your process is actually doing. And then the other key things to consider not putting in your log messages these days, with the sensitivity of personal data and some GDPR laws, it's really good to make sure that you don't log any passwords or any personal information in your log messages, because that will be captured in your logs and orchestrator, and that might be considered as an audit point when you do an audit. So that's around log messages. The next item will be around code reviews. So code reviews is really a key point for growing as a team and learning from each other, as well as keeping each other accountable for sticking to best practices, and also sharing some different ideas of approaching the same problem. And then one of the other key tools that UiPath provides us with is the analyze file function. And here you'll find that there's quite a bit of rules set up already, and you can deactivate them or activate them. You can also go in the link to find more information around that particular rule. But these rules can run through your code and automatically generate output list of exceptions for you, for specific rules. And then you can easily go through those and see, okay, these are things that still need to be rectified before we publish the project. And it's really sort of automation checklist for key things that you want to stick to in terms of design best practice. Then our next point is around code repositories and version control. So if we go to Studio, UiPath provides default integration with most of the leading code repositories. For the community version that I'm showing here, it's only showing with GitHub. But for the enterprise version, you will also be able to connect with SVN and also Microsoft Team Foundation Server as well. So these default plugins that you can just connect to your existing code repository that you're using. And then if you go to your Orchestrator instance, in Orchestrator, you'll find under your tenant tab, there's a packages tab as well. That will contain all your projects that you've deployed. If you go to any one of the specific projects, you'll be able to find the versions that's been deployed. And from the versions, you'll be able to download any of the previous versions packages. And then from there, you can just work with your packages. The only downside with the downloading the packages from here, it won't have the screenshots folder in. So, all your screenshots will be missing. But you can still have any of the previous packages that you want to refer back to. And it's also really good to always put a release note in when you publish your packages, so you can have a descriptive release note and knowing what was that version, what was updated in that version. So that's also really important for the code repositories. Then our next item is around reusable code and library components. So as I mentioned earlier, when you build out your processes, it's really good practice to break your process up into smaller components that can easily be unit tested. And in some cases, when that component is really not too complicated and it's something that you find can be reused quite a lot in different processes. For example, login and logout sequences is something that really gets reused over and over again. Those things can be moved to a library project, and then it can just be references from your library into your various projects, and then you have a central place for maintaining those components, and you only have one place that you need to make changes. And then UiPath provides a very useful tool, which is the project dependency mass updater tool. So let's say you have to make an update to one of your libraries, and that library is referenced into 16 or 17 projects. You can then make your update to your library, go into the mass dependency update tool, and from there you can find all the relevant projects that uses that library, and then publish the changes out to all your projects, as well as the new version of your project will be published to Orchestrator as well. Really useful project tool that UiPath provides for maintaining your changes to your libraries and feeding that back to your projects. And our last point is around application security, assets and credentials. So it is really important to make sure that your assets and credentials get stored either inside your credential store in Orchestrator or in another credential store and then synced up to Orchestrator, so that when you design your workflows, you reference your credentials from from Orchestrator, and it's securely maintained and encrypted in a single place. You never want to hard code your passwords and credentials inside your workflow. So really key to remember, always keep passwords and credentials into a credential store saved securely. And that wraps up the presentation. Yes, if you feel that this were useful, or you think there's other points that I might have missed that might be useful as well to consider when you do put together a design best practice sort of framework, please leave comments below, and if there's any other topics that you think will be useful for me to review at some point in time, please feel free to leave a comment as well. Thanks for watching.